Now we're back with a Q&A.
Yeah.
Okay. So the first question I have here is from a listener in Monaghan. And they want to know, when exactly are you the big 5-0?
Well, I am the 9th of October.
Right.
I am born on John Lennon's birthday.
Okay.
So we're both obviously icons of our age, you know. So.
And the next question from another listener is...
How come I didn't see these questions?
What's the plan?
What's the plan? Well, you know, get a nice early night and get up the next morning. No, there is no exciting plan, it has to be said, is there?
Is there not? Well, I mean, it's
I haven't even thought about it. Yeah, I might, like, I always...
have a major party or anything like that.
No, I don't think so.
I think there'd be plenty would go to
that. Maybe so.
Maybe.
I'll think about it.
Yeah. Are you not a kind of a celebrator of these things?
Well, I'm getting more stuck in my ways as I get older. Are you? Are you not getting more stuck in your ways?
Oh, probably. But I went to Vegas for mine.
You went to Vegas,
And I lost my glasses and my driving license.
And why did you lose them, Nicola? What was the conditions?
The conditions were that they were. I actually wasn't carrying a wallet, so the driver's license was stuck in the front of this bag.
Yeah.
And the glasses.
Yeah. That was what
the glasses were left on a table.
And how did that happen?
Because I had them out to look at the price of my next cocktail and put them down on the table. That was it. I just thought it was quite pathetic.
I did at one point say I am Europe's most boring man, didn't I? And I know one of the somebody in the courts actually stopped you and said, "Is he actually Europe's most boring man?"
It's a little bit more classy, in fairness to you, not to go to Vegas for your 50th because it really is very juvenile.
It is.
Very Arrested Development of me.
Yes.
I enjoyed every minute of it, but there you go.
Look, we'll see. I wouldn't be holding out for any... I wouldn't be hiring paparazzi.
Are you okay about it all? How are you feeling about it?
I kind of feel okay about it. Do you know?
Yeah, you're still a bit away from it.
No, I think I feel... like we were just talking about Adolescence there, that programme in another pod, which might be out before this, and I was actually watching that, thinking loads of things, but one of them was, geez, I'm glad I'm not a teenager anymore.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I'm more at ease with being the big 5-0, I think. But I remember being traumatised by turning 30.
I've been traumatised by all of those big ones.
But you know what? I remember when I was turned 18. This is the truth now. This shows you how wrong in the head I was.
Right.
Thinking, it's all over now, I'm 18. Sure, I've not done anything with my life. I'm 18 already and I've done fuck all. And you know what I thought? Alexander the Great had taken over half the world by the age of 17. And here I am, 18, and I've done nothing.
That just shows how weird you were.
I know.
What other 18-year-old was thinking about that? Alexander the Great.
Don't know, Nicola.
Yeah, no, I did. I definitely had massive issues with turning 30.
Did you?
Massive issues with turning 40.
Yeah.
And massive issues with turning 50. But once it happened, people always say to you, it's just like another day, but it actually is.
But
and then you realise you're at the beginning of the century.
Yeah.
Wow.
You know, now I've shown this article around. It's a scientific study
about
the most miserable age of human life. Do you know what age it is?
Probably about 26.
No.
30.
No, 47.2 years.
No!
That's when you're at peak misery, according to scientists. So that's
why
when
would
you're
you be miserable then?
Because your kids are teenagers. You're in loads of debt.
True.
Your parents might be getting elderly.
Very true. All of that. Yeah.
And so it goes. You start off. Your teenage years are a struggle. Your early 20s are happy. And then you get a bit more struggle, and peak misery is 47.2. So we're over that.
Yes.
And we start
and headed towards happiness again.
And do you know when the happiest time of your life is? If you have good
60s,
health.
Is it?
Your early 70s.
Wow.
Yeah. So there you go.
And that's so far away.
Yeah.
I have to say, I think the hardest is, late 20s into your 30s. I suppose I had kids, sort of relative terms, young enough.
Yeah.
So I found it, the 30s were just, I mean, I don't know how I did it.
Yeah.
The 30s, full-time job and kids and all that jazz.
But I am surprised.
Hard for different reasons, but
I am surprised.
I'm looking forward to all my 50s.
Yeah, well, there you go.
So you're going to feel the same way?
I feel absolutely the same. I feel...
I'm just going to keep banging on about it, though.
I don't know. But if anybody has continued to listen to us talking about our ages, I'll be surprised. But
anyway, okay, so...
I'll do my first question then.
Right, go on.
So this is a good one. And this, I think, actually goes to a bit of the heart of Crime World, right?
Oh.
What is with the big pity party for Nathan McDonald on Crime World and in the Sunday world?
Right, fair enough. Yeah, I get it.
Yeah.
Yes, I don't really totally over-pity him.
No.
But he did get pulverised in prison and his jaw smashed up and broken. And he's very remorseful and regretful for those reasons.
In public, anyway.
Yeah. Well, I mean, in public, plus in his actions around the case, in fairness, he did try and plead guilty before he was able to plead guilty. You know what I mean? Yeah. And I think he has gone into an environment where he just feels like, to me, that he's going to be the kid that's bullied in the classroom.
Yeah.
So there's an element of all that, you know. But I don't actually feel over pity for him. I think at the same time, he was a greedy, I can't use the language that's coming to my head.
Well, he did it. He became heavily involved in the drugs trade solely for financial gain.
And the financial gain, so, we were told all about his woes, his financial woes, which were all pretty much like they were brought on by himself through greed, I think. It's not like the business went into a downturn because there was a recession or anything. He was building that business, Ballyseedy, which had been gifted to him down through the family and which he expanded and borrowed to expand. He didn't pay his tax bill. So that money went where or was spent on lifestyle, I don't know. But when he got into trouble and he owed money to the revenue, there was 100 and odd jobs relying on him. He did this thing with ultimately through drugs coming from the Sinaloa cartel in Mexico for a very small amount of money in relative terms, 100,000 or thereabouts. But he wasn't going to use that to pay off the people who he owed or to try and salvage jobs. That seemed to have been just about enough to keep up the lifestyle for another kind of few months or whatever it was.
I mean, I think I don't know if we had a pity party for him for a start.
Well, after I saw him in the courtroom and he just looked, because he was being sentenced, of course, and he had literally been released from hospital where he'd had his jaw wired up and he'd a steel plate put in his mouth because he'd been jumped by a guy called Glenn Thompson, one of the Kinahan hired would-be hitmen of Patsy Hutch, who is accordingly a volatile and violent individual. I was told that he was jumped either just because the guy didn't like him because he was different or because they were trying to, the investigation was they might be putting pressure on him to go around to move drugs around the prison. So I would feel sorry for anybody in that case. I think I have a thing about being in prison anyway and then being beaten in prison where you cannot escape. I think it must be horrendous. You hear situations where, they will go into a cell and beat somebody up. And I just can't think of anything more frightening where you're literally locked in a prison cell and you're being attacked like that. So from that point of view, you couldn't be human and not feel sorry for him standing in the dock that day. He was grey. His pallor was grey. And he just looked like shit.
But you see, I suppose, like Crime World, the podcast we're obviously employed by the Sunday World, and that's our background.
But we're employed by Media House.
Well, we are, but and if you're writing an article about Nathan McDonald, it's going to be 1,000 words or whatever, and you're not going to give a rounded picture maybe of his character. It's a snapshot. But when you talk about somebody, you have to take in some of their character in there or the things that have happened to them and give a bit of like light and dark, and I think we're happy to be called out on that and say, well, we're not going to not do that. The other thing, so, there's no point in an article you might read it and think this guy is, whatever. But, we're trying to give a more balanced perspective in when you're talking a broader perspective, I suppose. The other thing is that a few people have contacted me from Kerry.
Oh.
Over time with Nathan McDonald and saying, they're a bit sickened by some of the,
Sympathy.
Well, and I mean, yeah, just a bit like, and their point would be, well, he's very sorry now, but would he still be doing it if he hadn't been caught?
I agree with them totally.
Yeah, and that also that he, he wasn't always, he might have been a hail fellow, well-met person, but he wasn't automatically popular. There was a bit of a sense of him lording it over other people and feeling he could get away with anything. And I would imagine both of those things are true. If he hadn't been caught, would he have done it again?
Oh, I would say definitely. And, look, it will emerge in time, no doubt. There's another person before the courts who so far pleaded not guilty, James Lean, in connection with this plot to ship crystal meth to Australia, which was being held in the Ballyseedy Garden Centre in a specially made container thing. But it happened before, because, in the UK in particular, what they will do is when they take a case, they might have one seizure, but they will estimate how many have already got through. I mean, that hasn't come out yet. It may do. Do we think this is the first time you were caught smoking around the back of the first time you smoked, you were caught? The first time you did anything, you were caught? I don't know. I don't always buy that, but, it'll remain to be seen if there is evidence of more of this stuff. But I think there's something about his, he was looking really bloody successful, wasn't he? He was on telly, and he was in the Chamber of Commerce, and he was a sort of celebrated young, good-looking guy with a good-looking family. And, there can be a little bit of an attitude that people like to see people like that fall as well.
Yeah, but I think there was a bit of an attitude from him that people picked up on, rightly or wrongly, that, he's in another league to you. You know what I mean? That he felt that as well. And look, it's a valid criticism. I don't know if we had a pity party for him. I think we were always clear that...
Is that what it says, pity party?
Yeah.
Where does it say that?
Well, it's in the question.
Pity party?
Yeah.
Who sent that in?
You going after them?
I'm going to doorstep them.
What's the big pity party?
We're not going to name anybody.
No, we're not, of course.
Obviously.
No, I think I think we always make clear that Nathan McDonald wasn't solely a ghillie, that he played a role in the importation of these drugs. He didn't solely store them. He actually participated in developing false invoices. He sought to financially gain to a significant extent. So I think he got a fair sentence, to be honest. And he's going to spend a long time in jail.
And people from Kerry, please keep contacting us, and any more information you have, I really appreciate, because this is obviously just the beginning of the story. Nathan McDonald is only a small part of the story of what has happened down around there. My question now I'm going to pick, right? Here's one for you.
Okay.
When will we get an additional prison? There are criminals with hundreds of convictions walking the streets. Very true.
It's very true. Now, I know we've said it before, but I think people really aren't aware that if there's people getting sentences of 3 months for, road traffic, fines, non-violent offences, a lot of them are simply being brought to prison. They sign a few forms, they probably pose for a picture, get their fingerprints taken, and walk straight out the door. I mean, they might, on some occasions, spend a night or two and they're out on TR straight away. Like, we don't have the prison places to cope with the amount of people getting convicted. It's a simple fact of life. Now, once again, like, as we've seen with the housing crisis, with some of the healthcare crises in this country, our state don't like to make those big long-term investments, do they? I mean, when they did it with the Children's Hospital, obviously that's ran overdue. But, we don't like building houses, even though we're in a housing crisis. We wanted to, put it out to the private sector. I don't see...
There's probably additional accommodation. I mean, there is additional accommodation in Portlaoise, is there not?
There is some...
We renovated.
There is some additional places, but, like in the UK, are we simply, going to run out? We're simply running out of spaces for a lot of the...
And the population has been growing.
The population is growing. We're a relatively young population. We're more likely to end up in prison. We also have, I suppose, not, even last year, for knife crime, for example, the sentences were extended, that you get a longer sentence if you're convicted of a knife crime. So the political pressure goes the other way, in that we are more likely to bring in mandatory sentences or bringing in new laws on, maybe domestic violence or stalking, all of these things that come with prison sentences, but we don't seem to increase the number of prison spaces. Now, there's a few issues with that. It's not solely that we don't have enough places to keep people, but also that if you talk to people who work in the prisons, and the Prison Officers Association will have said this again and again, that you create this kind of powder keg atmosphere inside in jails as well, because simply managing everybody becomes the real focus of the prison system, and that the ability to rehabilitate people and, all of that becomes much more difficult as you're simply trying to firefight and cope with resources. But it's definitely a huge issue. And if people put pressure on politicians to give basically to bring in laws to give people longer jail sentences, but you have to deal with that on the other side as well.
Here's another question that just relates to that while we're on to it. You're talking about people getting 3-month sentences and coming out like after doing their fingerprints. What's the story? Actually, we get a load of questions about Limerick feuds.
Okay.
What's the story on Desi Dundon's release?
Yeah.
He got life, which can sometimes be less than 20 years. He's in there about that now. I'll Google that while you were talking. Will he ever get out, and what would be his terms and conditions?
Well, his terms and conditions are the same for anybody who's been given a life sentence. He's been convicted of the murder of Kieran Keane Sr., one of the major killings that was part of that Limerick feud that went on so long and cost so many lives. Desi Dundon's conditions once he is released is that he's a life sentence prisoner. Anybody who has been convicted of life, people always say life doesn't mean life. They're out after 17 years, and that of course is true. But once they are out, they're still always serving a life sentence for the rest of their lives, and they can be brought back in prison if they cause any level of problems. So I know, for example, there was a case involving a woman who was convicted of murder. She'd been out of prison for 4 or 5 years, and she was caught, I think, drinking and causing a bit of chaos while drunk and taking drugs. And she was put back in prison for 1.5 years before she was released again. So it's basically the prison system can take you back in at any time.
And some prisoners take up a lot more time and a lot more space nearly than others. I mean, just looking in the end of last year, Desi Dundon had been moved to Cork prison, which is totally overcrowded, but he'd been given a single cell.
Yeah, I mean, most murderers get the single cells, yeah.
Most murderers get the single cell because it's seen as the only comfort they have, and they don't have anything to look forward to. He was placed on the B2 landing where all the lifers were housed. I mean, him and his brothers, and the amount of moving around prisons they do with them is unbelievable. Is there anybody as transferred as the Dundons?
No, I mean, and there is a reason. I mean, I don't know if it's official policy, but obviously if prisoners are moved around on a regular basis, they don't get to, create these little empires. So if you're having a prisoner moved around regularly, it stops that happening where they develop these relationships and start bullying people and all of that. I always was told about Desi Dundon. I mean, he's probably the less infamous of the brothers. Wayne and John, I think, are far more notorious. They're far more... They obviously were out for a lot longer, and they were the names that people, I think Wayne would be the name most people would spring to mind. But people always said to me, Desi Dundon is the most sinister of them all. That he is the most, he had that reputation of being really, something wrong with him,
Well, I mean, the brothers aren't exactly a walk.
No, they're not. They're not a walk in the park. But somebody always said to me, if you knew them,
he
had a sort of a darkness to him.
So he was 20 when he was imprisoned for the murder of Kieran Keane.
Yeah.
And he has so far served 22 years.
Yeah. He
was refused parole last year on the basis of this, what was called a secret dossier compiled by An Garda Síochána. And in that is obviously hints of what you're describing as that very sinister, dangerous personality, that the prison service and the parole board do not believe he's eligible for release, meaning that he's a danger to society still.
He's a danger to society. I think we're seeing with gangland killers, which Desi Dundon is, I think you're going to see that they're going to serve far more years than, for want of a better term, a regular murderer. Obviously, no murderer is regular, but people who have been involved in those sort of gangland killings, it's not going to be that they're out after 14 to 17 years. They're going to be kept in a lot longer. Now, we had other examples of people. I'm thinking Craig White, who was convicted as part of a killing as part of the Crumlin Drimna feud, where he was a getaway driver, and we saw him starting to get day release after 14 years. But he had been in the prison system, and he had been, regarded as being a very good prisoner, somebody who's rehabilitated, presumably stayed out of trouble, engaged with, the services there, engaged in education. We're not getting that sort of stuff about Desi Dundon, or in fact his two brothers. And
still those houses are there.
Yeah.
And their women are waiting for them. I mean, one of the most intriguing things about Desi Dundon is his love life.
Yeah.
Because while he was 20 when he was incarcerated for life, he developed a relationship in the aftermath of that with a younger girl. Ciara Lynch is her name, and she was visiting somebody else in prison, very young, I think, and she looked over and caught Desi Dundon's eye, and they have been betrothed ever since.
Yeah.
And this relationship has not been...
What were you going to say? Well, I mean, I think that one of the reasons we're talking about Ciara Lynch is that she has obviously come before the courts. Presumably, she's allowed to have personal visits with Desi Dundon, but they've never been out together. They've never gone on.
What do you mean by that?
Well, they've never gone on a date, have they?
Yeah, well, I know that. But when you say personal visits,
well,
what I was going to say was, they're in this relationship, but they've clearly never.
Yeah. What were we going to say?
I'm way too prudish.
Yeah. Well, look, I'm sure we can.
We all get the gist, don't we?
So, I mean, obviously she came before the courts.
But she's waited for him, and she's seen him. She met him then, and he's serving life, and she's living there mostly in his house.
Yeah.
On the Hyde Road, and she has been really deeply loyal to the Dundons and to him. And this white wedding is going to happen. I'm sure she hopes soon, but we're still not even. He could be in for another 10 years or more.
He could be past 50 before he gets out.
Yeah, and then
he could be over the age of misery.
But he could be happy. Yeah. Anyway, so yeah, it's unusual, isn't it?
It is
to say the least.
It is unusual,
to say the least. The loyalty of a woman, eh?
Okay.
I was going to ask myself this one, or maybe you've spotted it just about Raonaid Murray. I thought was interesting.
No, come on, ask that one. Yeah, we have.
Yeah, so somebody has asked, when, if ever, can we expect developments on Raonaid Murray's murder? So, do you recall Raonaid Murray's murder?
Well, I do. I do remember it. It's one of those cases again that really stuck in people's minds.
It's something that happened in September of 1999. In an area that I would know very well. She was an 18-year-old, was she even 18? 17, I think, year old girl. And she had been in Dunleary socialising in a pub. She had walked back to her house to change and never made it, basically. Her body was discovered by her sister. She had been horrifically stabbed, disemboweled, and left on this little laneway in a place where crime doesn't often occur, an area called Glenageary, which is just near enough to Dunleary and where her parents lived. She was found not that long after she had been killed, and despite a kind of a manhunt, nobody has ever been apprehended for her murder. Her killer, it was always believed, it's an intriguing murder, her killer, it was described many times over the years as being overkill. There was something personal going on. There was profilers from the US brought in to try and come up with who could possibly have had this utter hatred of a 17-year-old girl. At one point, it was suggested that maybe it was a woman, but I think the strength of the stab wounds and whoever had inflicted them on her, it was believed to be a man. There certainly was some DNA discovered, but has never been matched.
Yeah.
So, you know, in other words, this killer came out of the darkness, attacked her in a place where very little occurs, very quiet. You know, we always hear this.
Yeah.
And disappeared back into the darkness. There has never been a suspect.
No.
There has been 100 or more persons of interest in it. But it's never, you know, the difference between a suspect and a person of interest. And maybe some people listening don't, but a person of interest is somebody who has questions to answer, maybe. There's a little bit of suspicion around them. A suspect is when you're getting nearer.
Yeah, there's a pattern there that could, you know, there's a number of factors coming.
A number of different factors, and it's not just a question of just questions to answer. And over the years, there has been kind of clairvoyance. There's been absolutely everything involved in this case.
Yeah.
And it's not like a gangland murder we hear people talking about, that, you know, certain districts in the city, in the country, are overwhelmed by the amount of murder cases they have. I would have thought that, just from memory, from recent memory, there weren't too many in that area. This is probably, you know, one of the few unsolved ones on the books. I don't think there's been any question that there has been incompetence by the Gardaí. I think they've done everything they can. I think it's just a really frustrating case that someday there will be a break in it, perhaps. Maybe if somebody dies, if somebody comes forward, if a crime is committed, if that little piece of DNA is picked up through something else. But it's been a long time. Like 99 is what, 26 years now?
26 years. I think a lot of these cases in the modern world, they can be picked up by CCTV. You know, there's that, those sort of random attacks. You will often see that people...
There was actually CCTV.
Was there?
Yeah, she was pictured on the CCTV leaving Scott's pub and making her... They were literally able to follow her way. Like, there was quite a lot of CCTV on the Dún Laoghaire Main Street. And it's only kind of as she went up a shortcut towards where she was going home to change, to come back out again, that she goes off the CCTV. You're right, in the modern world, there's probably more cameras on the houses in the area.
Yeah, they pick up something. And that's why you're seeing a lot of cases now. They will be able to build up a better picture. But those types of murders, where, you know, they're really difficult then without a witness of some type. There's obviously a lot of cases, some of these cases involving you know, women, the high profile cases where the guards are 100% sure they know who did it.
Yeah.
And they simply haven't been able to piece it all together in a way that they believe they're going to be successful in a court.
And frustrating in another way for them that way, because they can see the person they believe did it and they're just getting on with life.
Yeah. But
this is a really rare one where there isn't, they've never got close to an actual suspect as such either.
Yeah.
Now, it was over the years, because it was knife crime and that's particular.
Yeah.
You know, obviously Graham Dwyer, when he was picked up in relation to the murder of Elaine O'Hara, you know, a South County Dublin architect living in the guise of being a normal, respectable family man, because of his penchant for knives, he would have been looked at. And over the years, there's been other people who've come up that might have been involved in some sort of random knife attacks.
Yeah.
And always they are cross-referenced. They'll go back to see where they might have been at the time. Yeah, it's a flabbergasting case, and it would be fun. It'd be amazing for her family.
Yeah,
I'm sure. I mean, those parents, her sister, I think she had a brother, have been left with that.
100%, and you know, yeah, it's you know, and it's attracted a kind of some nutty theories as well, hasn't it? That have been propagated, and that's, I think, been really tough on the family as far as I know.
And there were issues early on, I think, certainly with some of the the investigations in the early days, that there were certainly issues there. But I think in general, you know, when you look up to now, the detectives who are not actively working on it anymore, because you can't. When do you stop and when do you start? When do you start again? If new evidence comes in, or if any new evidence comes in, they do anniversary, appeals for information. They constantly sort of believe that somebody out there knows. There's always that thing, isn't there?
Yeah.
Somebody out there knows, somebody has boasted, somebody has told, somebody suspects, and yet they've held that secret for all these years. But so the answer simply to that question is, I don't know. And I don't think anybody knows when or if there will be developments on it. But I think anybody with half a heart would love to see something come on that case for her family and her friends.
Yeah. Here's a good one about a guy that we have talked on many occasions about, but it's a good question. How powerful is or was George the Penguin Mitchell, and how did he rise to the top? Obviously, George...
He's my favourite.
Is he?
Yeah. No, I don't mean personally.
No.
Just as a character of the underworld, I think he is fascinating.
Yeah. So, I mean, George Mitchell was initially an armed robber, really from the Ballyfermot area.
He was a delivery driver. He used to drive biscuits, didn't he? In the Jacobs factory.
Drive in the Jacobs factory, and he became involved in that kind of wave of organised crime, which was really sort of bank robberies, other robberies. He would have been an associate of the
Cunningham brothers, John and Michael Cunningham, John Gilligan, came out of that Ballyfermot area where a lot of them would have been sort of working together loosely under the general.
Yeah, and, George Mitchell, I think it's fair to say, was a sharp guy. And when the drugs business started to become the area where big money was to be made, he was right in. He left the country, I think, sometime in the early 90s. At that point, he'd already really moved into the ecstasy business. I think he was.
Well, he had built a factory.
He'd built a factory.
He was that far advanced. He wasn't somebody who was going to just own the local corner store. He wanted to be the big supermarket magnate. He had developed relations with the Cork mafia, as they were known. There was a crackdown by the Gardaí on operations down in the south and everywhere else. A factory was discovered where it was ready to go to roll out ecstasy. He had the ingredients ordered to do that, and he was going to obviously cut out the shipping bill.
Yeah,
by making it here. But there was a couple of stories. I mean, there was that, plus also he'd fallen foul of the kind of concerned Parents Against Drugs.
Yeah,
he'd been named in the Dáil by the late Tony Gregory, and he had also fallen out with the INLA.
Yes.
So he moved to the Netherlands.
And he'd become a target of CAB. I mean, he'd had a long sort of running struggle with CAB when it initially set up. So I think the thing about George Mitchell was he always had that far sight, didn't he? He was always seeing over the next corner.
Yeah.
So when others were, running their national drugs business, he was thinking internationally. When others were buying their properties in Ireland, he was thinking, I'm getting out of here and going big time. And he moved to Holland. And although people still talked about him, and it was obvious he was a figure in the criminal underworld, he sort of disappeared really from view, didn't he? Well,
from our view, he did.
Yes.
But in actual fact, he just grew into a very powerful figure. He initially got involved in shipping, and he was involved in stolen computer parts, which brought him into connection with the guy that I would meet him with many moons later, Herman Zent, a kind of a wacky Dutchman who was one of those people that were there when the internet was beginning, and who believed that the internet was going to be a separate state, and that it was going to have rulers, and it was going to still don't have the total mindset.
Kind of libertarian, I suppose, is what you just described them as. And
lived underground in a bunker, and purchased a bunker in the Netherlands, and was there when there was an explosion, and when the fire brigade came, they'd found there was yet another ecstasy factory that was underground. But anyway, Mitchell and Zent seemed to be, friends and cahoots forevermore. But Mitchell sort of becomes this international businessman. He goes by the name of George Green. He starts to make connections with, bit like Christy Kinahan, actually.
A bit like Christy.
He's laundering money through all sorts of stuff. I mean, unbelievable stuff. And he's also got direct connections with the Colombians. I remember reading these bail, to move it on, I suppose, years later, he shows up in Germany with this aforementioned Hermann Zent, who has established a huge underground data centre that Mitchell is believed to have financed. And he's there in Germany, and there's a huge big raid on this place. 600 police go in, and there's a trial in Germany, which Zent is on trial, but Mitchell sort of escapes the net. But while the police are investigating this, they have to keep looking for warrants for phone taps.
Yeah.
Phone tapping. Germany are very apparently strict on this kind of stuff. So they were going to the courts for warrants for something like 16 of Mitchell's phones.
Yeah.
And to get the warrants, they had to give evidence. And in many cases, and I have all the files somewhere, they would cite incidents where they believed that Mitchell had imported cocaine.
Yeah.
And we are talking directly
yeah.
from the Colombians in huge amounts
yeah.
into Spain, moving it on very quickly. He was sending guns back, according to these warrants, to the north of Ireland. He'd connections and tentacles.
Yeah, I mean,
absolutely everywhere.
And it was amazing stuff because there was, I mean, the other mentions were of his ties with biker gangs across the sort of northern part of Europe.
He was kept under surveillance while he was meeting, the head of one of the head of the Hells Angels chapters, who had come. He was actually, you see, of course, in this underground bunker.
Yeah.
Zent and Mitchell were financing essentially a kind of an EncroChat style communication system.
Yeah.
That Zent was going to develop technically because he was the big computer nerd, and Mitchell was going to be able to sell because he had all the connections into the crime gang. So they were really going to make hay on this.
But again, one step ahead of the others.
Futuristic for a guy of his age.
For a guy of his age, still realising that, technology was going to play a big role in the drugs business.
For sure.
Now, even through all of this time, he has this network in Ireland. There's a guy we spoke about not so long ago, I think either yourself or myself with Eamon, Patrick Lawler, who's fighting a cab case. So he was, Patrick Lawler, currently serving a lengthy sentence in prison, and he was effectively the bagman for the Penguin gang in Ireland. And you could see the huge amounts of money he was making.
His brother Paddy Mitchell remained here. And
he
was kind of like his real sort of, cohort.
Now, he was slightly different than the Kinahans, though, in that he didn't seem to be as obsessed with running every bit of the operation. I think he was, or not in personally, but once the drugs came to Ireland, I mean, I think the Kinahans seem to try and take control from the guys selling on the street corner right the way up to the top. I think George Mitchell became a massive, massive wholesaler, and he had his networks rather than maybe slightly different than the Kinahans. He wasn't ordering, like if you look back over the decade between 2000 and maybe 2020, there was loads of murders being ordered by Daniel for relatively small stuff, but he certainly
but there weren't probably murders being ordered. They might have been sanctioned by Christian Kinahan Senior, and I think Mitchell was on the same level as him. He was kind of he was moonlighting, or has been moonlighting, as a businessman, as a legitimate businessman with a different name, just like Kinahan. And they were, I thought it was interesting around the time that the feud breaks out. Mitchell makes his way to Germany at that time and he tells people that he doesn't want to get involved in the feud because, of course, he has a foot in Hutch camp and a foot in Kinahan camp.
Yes.
He realises how he does not need this. This is really bad for business. It's going to get filthy. He's probably more connected with the Hutch side of things, but I think he very quickly says he's staying neutral.
Yeah.
His neutrality actually empowered the Kinahan organisation against the Hutch organisation.
Yeah. And of course...
One thing I found just from my investigations into Mitchell, which was interesting, now he's a real dub, he's still a real dub. And he's always really worried about his health, even though like he eats too much, he drinks too much. I don't know whether he still smokes or anything like that, but he's been very unhealthy, but very, very concerned about his health and bequeathing everything onwards. But but he has that sort of personality that he doesn't have the ability to fix that.
Yeah.
He just keeps going back into, the same place.
Yeah,
and
he wouldn't be a dapper Don like Christy.
Not a dapper Don, no, he's definitely not. But he's supposed to be as mean as they come. He knows where every penny is.
Yeah.
Now other people say he can be very generous. He's very generous to those around him. He's been very generous to his partner and her family, and to his own flesh and blood. Really, he will lavish, gifts and all the rest of it on. But with others, he knows where his pennies are kept. What's that phrase they say?
Look after the pennies, the pounds, and look after yourselves.
Pounds,
there we go.
Pounds, there we go. That's kind of your generation sort of a phrase, isn't it?
Yeah, but a hugely interesting character. I definitely, the comparison with Christy is really interesting. Christy obviously became I suppose, an international man of business, but George Mitchell, while on the same scale, I think would wear his humble origins.
That was his in a way. That's what kept him under the radar, because he was, now whenever I was investigating him, was that 2015, 2015? Maybe I can't even remember. But he was living in Germany at that stage. But in the aftermath of that, he went back down to Marbella, where he does have a kind of very modest 2-bed apartment where he lives.
Yeah.
And he always drives like a kind of I'm going to say Nissan Micra, something like that, Yeah. He doesn't believe in driving the flash cars, drawing attention to himself. Like his business partner, his biggest kind of partner who has been with him throughout. Have you ever seen a picture of Robbie Murphy?
No, there is none.
There is none.
There is none.
Yeah.
Obviously a guy from North Dublin that's been...
And there wasn't a picture of Mitchell until we did track him down that time in Germany. Now, he didn't look a vast amount different. I think you would recognise him, would you?
No, I think he looks... Yeah, I mean, when you see it, you could say that's him, but you could have all the same. You could have walked past him on the street and not recognised him.
Except when you see his walk.
No, that's true. Yeah.
I have never in all my days. People say these nicknames come from the media or they come from the guards or whatever, but the Penguin, there was always a story about that he delivered these Jacob's biscuits, and that there was always pick up a penguin, which was, do they still exist, Penguin bars?
They do.
I used to have one in my lunchbox every day, or certainly on a treat day. But there was this kind of very famous ad, pick up a penguin.
Yeah.
And that's where he was supposed to have got his nickname. I believed that until I stood on a bridge in Traben-Trarbach in Moselle Valley in Germany and looked down the street to where I believed he was going to be walking up. And I literally saw a human penguin coming up the street. He waddles like literally from foot to foot.
Yeah.
I've never seen anyone walk that way. That was a name that came from the streets. That was a kind of a name. We've spoken about it before. These nicknames are usually your most unfortunate feature, ailment, or...
Yes. Like fat something is the most common one.
Fats are this and the other,
But the other thing I think, and that they do share, Christy Kinahan and George Mitchell, which when you did those brilliant investigations, they're paranoid. They're constantly paranoid. And I think that's how they survived.
Yeah.
Because you remember that with the things, and he was just constantly paranoid on the phones. They were being bugged, obviously, so he had reason to be paranoid.
Yeah.
But they're just paranoid about everything. Yeah. And I think that's what you need to be to survive that long. They can't trust anybody. They don't tell the left hand what the right hand is doing. They're just live in that state of constant wariness. I mean, for good reason in many ways, but I think that's.
I always wondered as well, because he when this big huge underground. I mean, it was like an underground. It was an old Cold War bunker.
Yeah.
They do exist all over Europe, and I have spoken to people who own these now since that investigation. But I remember being told that Mitchell suffered from claustrophobia, and that he had gone down one day to this bunker, which he had funded, financed, or was suspected of anyway. And he felt so, terrified in it that he came out of it like a scalded cat.
Yeah.
But I wonder, did he just prefer to keep his head above ground?
Yeah.
If you're paranoid,
Yeah.
you don't want to be trapped like that, do you?
No.
And there's so much options for bugging and, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like you're literally contained within a box.
Yeah.
Because he always used to say that that's why he couldn't go to the bunker and he didn't want to go to the bunker. He didn't want meetings there and he'd have his meetings above ground while walking along or in a restaurant, very noisy, difficult to bug. You know, he'd move from one little coffee shop to another little place, had his favourite spots as well, of course. But he was deeply paranoid and somebody who was able to remain on the move. Would you not get tired? You do need to have some sort of a personality to be able to stay on the move.
It's not, honestly, and to be constantly wary and to be, to never really have enough as well. I mean, like these guys have made huge amounts of money at times and they were probably in a position to step away from it, but they keep going back. Yeah. I mean, it's not driven by financial need. So there's something in all that personality makeup that isn't regular or common, and that's why they're pretty unique characters, I suppose.
And both were able to leave this town, which was their home, and never look back.
Never look back.
You know, never look back, settle somewhere else. I mean, lots of people do that. Mitchell and his wife are no longer together as a couple. He went on to have a relationship with his then secretary, they're now together. But I mean, he can literally, in the click of a fingers, move to the other side of the world, with or without her.
Yeah.
And live and exist for months on end on his own in hotels.
Yeah.
Now that all, like, I mean, there's times I do have to say, if I make it to about 70 and I'm at my happiest, I'm going to live in a hotel.
Right.
That's what I want.
Yeah.
That's what I really, now a nice one.
Yeah.
It's my dream to live in a hotel.
Well, you better.
Someone would make my bed, clean my room every morning. Breakfast. I'd go down for breakfast. I'm slightly digressing, only slightly. I'd go down for breakfast every morning, order my boiled egg, soft, my toast soldiers, my coffee.
Well,
all I want in the world.
You better either start saving or become involved in the drug trafficking business.
I might, or I'll hit the big time some other way.
Yeah.
But anyway, so sorry, that's just, but to live out of hotels, I mean, I say all that, but really, I love being home. I love my home. I love that sense of, I go away for a couple of weeks and I really absolutely adore that first night back in my own bed, my own home. No matter how exciting or amazing this trip or experience has been, I love it. And that they have to constantly remain on the move and, you know.
And I mean, presumably they could have at some point 10 years ago or whatever, really stepped totally away from any criminality and had enough money to do it.
I wondered though, can you? Or are you constantly
getting sucked back in?
You know, getting sucked back in because of what? Your addiction to the
buzz.
The buzz. Or when you're just money, are you constantly up or constantly down? Is it like having stocks and shares? And it must be a little bit because your money is so diversified.
Yeah.
That is there a point that you can see is the ideal moment to get out?
Well, maybe not. I mean, maybe you're always waiting for the next shipment, and then I'll be
just one more, and then I'll be
off
clear
those
and
guys, and then
get rid of those stocks over there, and I'll shift the money into here, and you know,
I don't know.
That's my pity party for Christy Kinahan Senior and for George Mitchell
at an end.
Maybe they'd sponsor me to live in a hotel forevermore.
Well, maybe.
Huh?
But yeah, maybe.
Right,
listen. You're probably not their favourite person, though.
One more question. Let me get one more question for you, and then we can knock it on the head, because there's loads more stuff here that we're going to have to come back to in a different episode of this. And keep the questions coming in, please, as well, to crimeworld@sundayworld.com. Did you see how quickly that flew off my tongue? Yeah, okay, here's one now. I don't know whether you're going to be able to answer this. I'm really bad at these direct questions myself, and people ask me. My nephew constantly hits me with these. What's your favourite colour? And I go, I don't know. I can't answer that. But I'll give you this. Of all the sinister characters you've met, who was the most sinister and why? Do not say Nicola and Niall.
Look, I remember meeting that guy, Patrick O'Brien, who was a sex offender.
Oh, yeah.
He was convicted of raping his daughter, Fiona Doyle, who, you know, spoke really bravely. And I mean, I don't know if he's the most sinister, but I just remember speaking to him and speaking to his wife who'd stood by him, and there was something so deeply wrong about what he'd done to his daughter, but not only what he had done, but it's kind of remorselessness, I suppose. And I found...
And did they engage with you? I find sometimes when you have these cases that there is, really awful rape within families and all the rest of it. Sometimes they do engage with you and they talk to you and they try and charm you. Do they?
Well, yes, that's what I mean. Like, it was kind of, it's somehow that it was justified. And obviously, there was another case with somebody who's spoken in our paper a few times, Raneid Murray, and she was, repeatedly raped and sexually assaulted by her father, Harry Daly, who was a prison officer, and it went on for many, many years. And, I did stories when he came out because, he pled guilty in court. So it wasn't a case that he didn't do it. Like, he publicly admitted doing it in court and served his time, and then went back into the arms of her mother, his wife, who took him back, and continued to sort of justify it. And basically, she was confronted by other people and sort of, I don't even know what sort of, it's not even worth saying it, but what sort of justification she gave. I find all of that stuff horrible. Like, there's obviously guys we've spoken before about, people like Dutchy Holland that I met and all that. But like, people that do that to their own kids, and then the women that stick by them.
The women that stick by them, take them back, the mothers.
The mothers. Yeah. And it's not even as if they can say, well, I didn't think he did it. Or I believe he didn't do it, and he's denying it.
There's something deeply sick and wrong going on.
Sickly wrong at that. And I remember doing a story.
Do those people, I wonder, seek one another out? Do they? I really are they those know. Sort of people that facilitate one another? And
I just don't know. And so, there obviously are people that have committed far more violent acts, but I just always remember that case with Raneid and Harry Daly, and we took a picture of him going back to the mother and the new apartment they had together, and just going, what in God's name is wrong with people?
You speak to those people sometimes. Over the years, I've spoken to sex offenders a good bit, and you just feel like you want to go home and have a wash.
Yeah, you want to, and exactly. But the women that stick by them, just bewildering.
Yeah, beyond.
Yeah.
Right, okay, well, let's leave that for the moment on that. Q&As, keep the questions coming in. crimeworld@sundayworld.com.
Brilliant.
See what happens when you hit 50.
Brain, right?
Your mind is as clear as...
As what? Come up with a good... As a crystal. Well done.
Okay.
Yes.
Right, goodbye.
Thanks, Nicola. Robbie Lawler was out of control.
This is Double Cross, the murder of Robbie Lawler.
It was going to be an all-out war with him in the middle of it.
Crime World special investigation podcast based on my new book, Web of Betrayal, wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Nicola Tallant, and you're watching Crime World, a podcast about criminals, drugs and the underworld in Ireland and across the globe. Make sure you subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you can be the first to watch all our latest episodes. You can also listen wherever you get your podcasts.